In a way, this is the last moment that human political power will matter. It's sort of a use it or lose it moment, because if we wait to the point where in the past, in the Industrial Revolution, they start automating, a bunch of the work, and people have to do these jobs that people don't want to do in the factory, and there's like bad working conditions. They can unionize and say, hey, we don't want to work under those conditions. And their voice mattered because the factories needed the workers. In this case, does the state need the humans anymore? Their GDP is coming in almost entirely from the AI companies. So suddenly this political class, this political power base, they become the useless class, to borrow a term from Yuval Harari, the author of *Sapiens*. And AI will reconstitute every other issue that already exists. You care about climate change or energy, well, AI will reconstitute the climate change conversation. If you care about education, AI will reconstitute that conversation. If you care about healthcare, AI reconstitutes all of these conversations. And what I think people need to do is AI should be a tier 1 issue that people are voting for. And you should only vote for politicians who will make it a tier 1 issue, where you want guardrails to have a conscious selection of an AI future and the narrow path to a better AI future, rather than the default reckless path.
Most people still think AI is about convenience, faster emails, quicker searches, smarter gadgets. But the truth is far bigger and far more disruptive. AI isn't here to upgrade the world. It's here to rewrite it. Education, healthcare, the workforce, creativity, science, even how we understand reality. Every system is about to be rebuilt from the ground up. And the most dangerous part? How quietly it's happening. While most people assume they'll have time to adapt, the shift is accelerating faster than anyone expected. Harris's warning is simple. The window to prepare is closing. If we don't start paying attention now, AI won't just change the world, it will leave millions behind before they even realize what happened. Let's take you back to Tristan Harris's warning, the interview where he laid out step by step how AI is quietly reshaping the world and why most people won't see it coming. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of the video.
The math, as I understand it, doesn't currently seem to work out where everyone can get a stipend to pay for their whole life and life quality that as they currently know it. And are a handful of Western or US-based AI companies going to consciously distribute that wealth to literally everyone, meaning including all the countries around the world whose entire economy was based on a job category that got eliminated? So for example, places like the Philippines, where a huge percent of the jobs are customer service jobs. If that got automated away, are we going to have OpenAI pay for all of the Philippines? Do you think that people in the US are going to prioritize that? So then you end up with the problem of you have law firms that are currently not wanting to hire junior lawyers because, well, the AI is way better than a junior lawyer who just graduated from law school. So you have two problems. You have the law student that just put in a ton of money and is in debt because they just got a law degree that now they can't get hired to pay off. And then you have law firms whose longevity depends on senior lawyers being trained from being a junior lawyer to a senior lawyer. What happens when you don't have junior lawyers that are actually learning on the job to become senior lawyers? You just have this sort of elite managerial class for each of these domains. So you lose intergenerational knowledge transmission. So relieving student debt is on the way to creating kind of universal basic need meeting, right? But I mean, we have that with Social Security. We've done this when it came to pensions. That was after the Great Depression. I think in like 1935, 1937, FDR created Social Security. But what happens when you have to pay for everyone's livelihood everywhere in every country? Again, how can we afford that? The math gets very confusing because I think the optimists say you can't imagine how much abundance and how much wealth it will create. And so we will be able to generate that much. But the question is, what is the incentive again for the people who've consolidated all that wealth to redistribute it to everybody else? And how will we do that when the corporate lobbying interests of trillion-dollar AI companies can massively influence the government more than human political power? In a way, this is the last moment that human political power will matter. It's sort of a use it or lose it moment, because if we wait to the point where in the past, in the Industrial Revolution, they start automating, a bunch of the work, and people have to do these jobs that people don't want to do in the factory, and there's like bad working conditions. They can unionize and say, hey, we don't want to work under those conditions. And their voice mattered because the factories needed the workers. In this case, does the state need the humans anymore? Their GDP is coming in almost entirely from the AI companies. So suddenly this political class, this political power base, they become the useless class, to borrow a term from Yuval Harari, the author of *Sapiens*. In fact, he has a different frame, which is that AI is like a new version of digital. It's like a flood of millions of new digital immigrants, of alien digital immigrants that are Nobel Prize level capability, work at superhuman speed, will work for less than minimum wage. We're all worried about, immigration of the other countries next door taking labor jobs. What happens when AI immigrants come in and take all of the cognitive labor? If you're worried about immigration, you should be way more worried about AI. You can think of it like this. I mean, if you think about, we were sold a bill of goods in the 1990s with NAFTA. We said, hey, we're going to, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, we're going to outsource all of our manufacturing to these developing countries, China, Southeast Asia, and we're going to get this abundance. We're going to get all these cheap goods, and it'll create this world of abundance. Well, all of us will be better off. But what did that do? Well, we did get all these cheap goods. You can go to Walmart and go to Amazon, and things are unbelievably cheap, but it hollowed out the social fabric. And the median worker is not seeing upward mobility. In fact, people feel more pessimistic about that than ever. And people can't buy their own homes. And all of this is because we did get the cheap goods, but we lost the well-paying jobs for everybody in the middle class. And AI is like another version of NAFTA. It's like NAFTA 2.0. Except instead of China appearing on the world stage who will do the manufacturing labor for cheap, suddenly this country of geniuses in a data center created by AI appears on the world stage. And it will do all of the cognitive labor in the economy for less than minimum wage. And we're being sold a same story. This is going to create abundance for all, but it's creating abundance in the same way that the last round created abundance. It did create cheap goods, but it also undermined the way that the social fabric works and created mass populism in democracies all around the world. And AI will reconstitute every other issue that already exists. You care about climate change or energy, well, AI will reconstitute the climate change conversation. If you care about education, AI will reconstitute that conversation. If you care about healthcare, AI reconstitutes all of these conversations. And what I think people need to do is AI should be a tier 1 issue that people are voting for. And you should only vote for politicians who will make it a tier 1 issue, where you want guardrails to have a conscious selection of an AI future and the narrow path to a better AI future rather than the default reckless path. Political incentives to mention it because there's no good answer for the current outcome. If I mention it, if I get people to see it clearly, it looks like everybody loses. So as a politician, why would I win from that? Although I do think that as the job loss conversation starts to hit, there's going to be an opportunity for politicians who are trying to mitigate that issue, finally getting, some wins. And people just need to see clearly that the default path is not in their interest. The default path is companies racing to release the most powerful, inscrutable, uncontrollable technology we've ever invented, with the maximum incentive to cut corners on safety, rising energy prices, depleting jobs, creating joblessness, creating security risks. That is the default outcome, because energy prices are going up. They will continue to go up. People's jobs will be disrupted, and we're going to get more, deep fakes and floods of democracy and all these outcomes from the default path. And if we don't want that, we have to choose a different path. Unless there's a massive political backlash because people recognize that this issue will dominate every other issue. Neil Postman, who's a wonderful media thinker in the lineage of Marshall McLuhan, used to say, clarity is courage. If people have clarity and feel confident that the current path is leading to a world that people don't want, that's not in most people's interests, that clarity creates the courage to say, yeah, I don't want that. So I'm going to devote my life to changing the path that we're currently on. That's what I'm doing. And that's what I think that people who take this on, I watch, if you walk people through this and you have them see the outcome, almost everybody right afterwards says, what can I do to help? Obviously, this is something that we have to change. And so that's what I want people to do, is to advocate for this other path. And we haven't talked about AI companions yet, but I think it's important, maybe we should do that. I think it's important to integrate that before you get to the other path.
Here's the uncomfortable truth. The promise of AI abundance sounds great until you ask who foots the bill when jobs vanish. Countries like the Philippines, where call centers prop up the economy, could be gutted overnight. Law students, deep in debt. face a market where firms would rather hire code than humans. And without entry-level roles, who trains the next generation of experts? There's a widening gap between those shaping this future and those being left behind. If we don't ask hard questions about wealth redistribution, we're not building abundance. We're just replacing jobs with silence and calling it progress.
I care about people. I want things to go well for people. I want people to look at their children in the eyes and be able to say, like, I think I grew up maybe under a false assumption, and something that really influenced my life was I used to have this belief that there was some adults in the room somewhere. Like we're doing our thing here. We're in LA, we're recording this, and there's some adults protecting the country, national security. There's some adults who are making sure that geopolitics is stable. There's some adults that are like making sure that industries don't cause toxicity and carcinogens, and that there's adults who are caring about stewarding things and making things go well. And I think that there have been times in history where there were adults, especially born out of massive world catastrophes, like coming out of World War II. There was a lot of conscious care about how do we create the institutions and the structures, Bretton Woods, United Nations, positive sum economics that would steward the world so we don't have war again. And in my first round of the social media work, as I started entering into the rooms where the adults were, and I recognized that because technology and software was eating the world, a lot of the people in power didn't understand the software, didn't understand technology. You go to the Senate Intelligence Committee and you talk about what social media is doing to democracy and where, Russian psychological influence campaigns were happening, which were real campaigns. And I realized that I knew more about that than people who were on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And that was a very humbling experience because I realized, there's not that many adults out there when it comes to technology's dominating influence on the world. And so there's a responsibility, and I hope people listening to this who are in technology realize that if you understand technology, and technology is eating the structures of our world, children's development, democracy, education, journalism, conversation, it is up to people who understand this to be part of stewarding it in a conscious way. And I do know that there have been many people, in part because of things like the social dilemma and some of this work, that have basically chosen to devote their lives to moving in this direction as well. But what I feel is a responsibility because I know that most people don't understand how this stuff works. And they feel insecure because if I don't understand the technology, then who am I to criticize which way this is going to go? We call this the under the hood bias. Well, if I don't know how a car engine works, and if I don't have a PhD in the engineering that makes an engine, then I have nothing to say about car accidents. Like, no, you don't have to understand what's the engine in the car to understand the consequence that affects everybody of car accidents. Mm-hmm. And you can advocate for things like, speed limits and zoning laws and, turning signals and brakes and things like this. And so, yeah, to me, it's just obvious. It's like, I see what's at stake if we don't make different choices. And I think in particular, the social media experience for me of seeing in 2013, it was like seeing into the future and seeing where this was all going to go. Like imagine you're sitting there in 2013 and the world's like working relatively normally. We're starting to see these early effects, but imagine you can kind of feel a little bit of what it's like to be in 2020 or 2024 in terms of culture and what the dumpster fire of culture has turned into, the problems with children's mental health and psychology and anxiety and depression. But imagine seeing that in 2013. I had friends back then who have reflected back to me. They said, Tristan, when I knew you back in those days, it was like you were seeing this kind of slow motion train wreck. You just looked like you were traumatized. My friends used to call it not PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, but pre-TSD, of having pre-traumatic stress disorder, of seeing things that are going to happen before they happen. And that might make people think that I think I'm, seeing things early or something. That's not what I care about. I just care about us getting to a world that works for people. I grew up in a world that, mostly worked. I grew up in a magical time in the 1980s, 1990s. And, back then using a computer was good for you. I used my first Macintosh and did educational games and learned programming, and it didn't cause mass loneliness and mental health problems and, break how democracy works. And it was just a tool and a bicycle for the mind. And I think the spirit of our organization, Center for Humane Technology, is that word humane comes from my co-founder's father, Jeff Raskin, actually started the Macintosh project at Apple. So before Steve Jobs took it over, he started the Macintosh project, and he wrote a book called The Humane Interface about how technology could be humane and could be sensitive to human needs and human vulnerabilities. That was his key distinction, that just like this chair, hopefully, is ergonomic. If you make an ergonomic chair, it's aligned with the curvature of your spine. It works with your anatomy. Mm-hmm. And he had the idea of a humane technology like the Macintosh that works with the ergonomics of your mind. That your mind has certain intuitive ways of working, like I can drag a window and I can drag an icon and move that icon from this folder to that folder, and making computers easy to use by understanding human vulnerabilities. And I think of this new project that is the collective human technology project now as we have to make technology writ large humane to societal vulnerabilities. Technology has to serve and be aligned with human dignity rather than wipe out dignity with job loss. It has to be humane to child's socialization process so that technology is actually designed to strengthen children's development rather than undermine it and cause AI suicides, which we haven't talked about yet. And so I deeply believe that we can do this differently, and I feel responsibility. This reminds me of the social media problem, which is that people think when they open up their newsfeed, they're getting mostly the same news as other people. And they don't realize that they've got a supercomputer that's just calculating the news for them. Mm-hmm. If you remember in the social element, there's the trailer. Yeah. And if you typed in into Google, for a while, if you typed in climate change is, and then depending on your location, it would say not real versus a made up thing. And it wasn't trying to optimize for truth. It was just optimizing for what the most popular queries were in those different locations. I think that that's a really important lesson when you look at things like AI companions, where children and regular people are getting different answers based on how they interact with it.
There is a moment in life when you realize the people you assumed were steering the world are not as prepared as you hoped. Many of us grew up believing there were capable adults somewhere behind the curtain, keeping society stable, protecting national security, shaping technology responsibly, and making decisions with long-term consequences in mind. But step inside those rooms today, and the truth is unsettling. The pace of technological change has outgrown the people meant to govern it, and power has shifted to systems they barely understand. The institutions built after past global crises had clarity and direction. What we have now is uncertainty, distraction, and a dangerous gap between influence and comprehension. That gap creates a new kind of responsibility. If you understand technology, even a little, you are no longer a spectator. You are part of the small group capable of seeing what others cannot. You do not need expert credentials to understand how these tools affect children, mental health, public discourse, or democracy. You only need to recognize that ignoring the problem does not protect anyone. Awareness is not arrogance. It is stewardship. And yet there's room for hope. Throughout history, progress has always depended on ordinary people who chose not to look away. People who understood the stakes before the consequences became impossible to ignore. We are living through one of those moments again. Technology can still be humane. It can still reflect human dignity instead of eroding it. But only if the people who recognize the danger also recognize their own agency. The future will not be shaped by the adults we once imagined. It will be shaped by the people who decide to step forward now. Not because it is easy, but because the alternative is a world that forgets what it was meant to protect in the first place. As we wrap up, do you think AI should be treated as a Tier 1 political issue? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video and hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.